Today we're going to analyze a terrifying case that will leave you shocked, so watch this video until the very end. A team of investigators was already en route to the house, this time for a formal, exhaustive search of the property. But this wasn't just a routine sweep. Now, they had concrete leads. Clues had been meticulously collected and pieced together, guiding them toward very specific points of interest. Their attention zeroed in on the basement, a space that suddenly carried new significance. There, something immediately stood out. A section of the concrete floor appeared freshly sealed. In the far corner, faintly lit by a lone overhead bulb, a raised cement platform caught their eye. It seemed utterly out of place. The construction didn't match the rest of the basement, and the materials looked oddly mismatched. Something was definitely wrong. The team knew this was where they needed to dig deeper. As they carefully examined the area, their suspicions were confirmed. That's when they found Lisa Mitchell. Dear viewers, on this channel, you will discover the most shocking, real, and chilling crime stories. If you don't want to miss any case, subscribe now and don't forget to leave your like. Lisa Mitchell was born on a warm summer day, August 5, 1983, in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. From her earliest years, Lisa was bright and spirited, often described by those close to her as imaginative, curious, and bursting with energy. Her parents noticed her creative side when she was just a toddler. She would sit for hours with crayons and markers, sketching everything from animals to fantastical worlds, displaying a rare focus for a child her age. By the time she was 4, Lisa had already developed a deep love for drawing. Her room was frequently scattered with sketchbooks, coloring pages, and art supplies. This passion wasn't fleeting. It became a core part of who she was. As she grew older, her interests broadened. In junior high, she joined an art club, and by high school, her creativity expanded beyond visual arts. She discovered music and quickly fell in love with it. Together with a few close friends, she formed a small band where she sang and occasionally played guitar. For Lisa, it was never about fame. It was about expression, emotion, and connection. Despite her artistic talents, Lisa's path after high school was anything but straightforward. Upon graduation, she decided to postpone college. She needed to work and support herself financially, especially since her family couldn't afford to help with post-secondary education. For several years, she juggled various part-time jobs, from waiting tables at local diners to retail work in downtown Calgary. Life was tough, but Lisa met each challenge with quiet determination. One evening, during a dinner shift at a mid-range restaurant, she met a man named Alan. Charming and easygoing, Alan seemed to genuinely appreciate Lisa's warmth and humor. Their relationship began casually, but soon grew inseparable. A few years later, they had 2 children, a boy first, then a girl. The young family eventually moved into a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, hoping to build a peaceful life together. For a while, everything seemed stable. Lisa shifted her attention to raising the children and working evening shifts at a nearby hotel, a job she enjoyed, especially since her mother worked there too. The 2 women often shared shifts and were known among co-workers for their close bond and positive spirits. Life settled into a routine of everyday moments: school runs, dinner preparations, bedtime stories. But beneath this calm surface, not everything was as it seemed. On the night of October 27, 2012, Lisa went to work as usual. The hotel was hosting a Halloween-themed event, creating a lively and festive atmosphere. Guests arrived in costume, music echoed through the halls, and Lisa and her mother enjoyed managing the crowd. After the event ended and their shift was over, Lisa chose to stay the night at her mother's house instead of driving home, a practice she'd done before when work ran late. The next morning, while sipping coffee and chatting about the previous night's fun, Lisa received a brief phone call. Afterward, she said she needed to leave. Something urgent had come up, and she had to return home. She didn't elaborate, and though her mother was a bit puzzled, she didn't question her. Lisa hugged her goodbye, got in her car, and drove away. That was the last time her mother saw her in person. At first, there was no immediate cause for concern. Lisa was independent and often busy, but as days passed without calls or messages, worry grew. Lisa was consistent about checking in, especially with her mother. A day or two without contact was rare. A week was unheard of. Concerned, her mother began calling repeatedly, only reaching voicemail. She reassured herself with excuses. Maybe Lisa was overwhelmed with work or the children, but the silence felt heavier with each passing day. Eventually, unable to ignore her instincts, Lisa's mother went to her daughter's house. When she arrived, Alan answered the door. Calm but distant, his words did little to ease her fears. He claimed that the day after Lisa left her mother's place, October 28th, they had argued. He said he stepped out briefly to buy cigarettes, and when he returned, Lisa was gone. According to him, she left without saying a word. But something about his story felt off. As Lisa's mother stood in the hallway, she glanced at the coat rack near the door. Hanging there were Lisa's winter coat and boots. It was late October in Calgary, already cold. Lisa wouldn't have left without them. Practical and cautious, especially about the weather, she never went out unprepared. Even more troubling, Lisa's favorite bracelet and necklace rested untouched on her dresser. These were items she always wore, sentimental pieces she never left behind, even for brief outings. Yet, her purse was missing. Before she left, Alan had mentioned Lisa sent him an email and suggested her mother check her inbox. That night, back home, she turned on her computer and found an email from Lisa. The message was vague, almost impersonal. Lisa wrote she felt overwhelmed and needed time alone. She promised she'd be okay and asked her mother not to worry. Over the following weeks, more emails arrived. Sporadic, inconsistent, always calm, always assuring she was fine but never offering details. When asked directly where she was or why she left so suddenly, Lisa dodged the questions. It was unlike her, increasing her mother's unease. Then came the voicemail. On the morning of November 16th, Lisa's mother woke to a missed call at 2:45 a.m. from Lisa's number. There was a voicemail. At first, relief washed over her. Lisa had reached out. But as she played the message, relief turned to confusion, then dread. Lisa's voice was unmistakable, but the message was strange. Her words were fragmented, rushed, hard to follow. "Hey, I'm okay. Sometimes my weeks get crazy, you know, and it was quiet for a while. And then all of a sudden this happened, and within half a day I should. But he's back now, and I gotta go. Love you." It sounded as if she'd been interrupted mid-recording. Pauses came at odd moments. Her tone shifted halfway through. Most unsettlingly, the message raised more questions than answers. Who was he? What had happened suddenly? Why couldn't she explain? Her mother replayed it repeatedly, hoping for clarity. But none came. She held on to hope that Lisa was safe somewhere, working things out. Yet deep down, a growing sense of dread took hold. That was the moment Lisa's mother knew she couldn't wait silently anymore. Too much time had passed with no real word from her daughter. Strange emails and one baffling voicemail weren't enough. So she did what any mother would. She went to the police. Sitting in a quiet wood-paneled room at the local precinct, Lisa's mother recounted everything. From the last time she saw Lisa, to Alan's odd behavior, the strange voicemail, and the many unanswered questions surrounding her daughter's disappearance. The detective took careful notes and promised a formal investigation. Once the inquiry began, a more complicated picture of Lisa and Alan's relationship emerged. What had seemed a stable home was actually filled with turmoil. Interviews with friends and extended family revealed a long, troubled history between the couple. Even before children, their relationship was a cycle of breakups and reconciliations, moments of hope overshadowed by repeated disappointments. Parenthood initially seemed to bring calm, shifting their focus to the kids and creating a semblance of stability. But beneath it all, frustrations festered, especially for Lisa. Over time, Lisa carried the heavy burden of being the primary breadwinner. Alan struggled to keep steady employment, while Lisa worked long hours, often juggling multiple jobs, all while managing most home responsibilities. The stress wore away at their trust and connection. At one point, Lisa confided in a close friend she was seriously thinking about ending the relationship, but stayed for the sake of their children, whom she loved deeply. Eventually, detectives brought Alan in for questioning. Calm and composed, he was surprisingly candid. He acknowledged the strain in their relationship and admitted that in recent years they stayed together mainly for their children's sake. According to Alan, their emotional bond had faded, and they'd been living separate lives under the same roof. What raised suspicion was Alan's claim that Lisa had occasionally seen other men. He wasn't angry, more resigned. "It wasn't a secret," he told investigators. "We both knew it. We weren't pretending to be in love anymore." Still, Alan insisted he had no idea where Lisa had gone. He was shocked she vanished without a trace, but even more baffled by her leaving their 2 children behind. Police then focused on the couple's house. A team conducted an exhaustive search, checking every room for clues. But they found no signs of foul play, no evidence suggesting Lisa was harmed or forced to leave. The home was unnervingly tidy. Investigators turned to Lisa's digital life, seizing her laptop to examine emails, messages, and social media. That's when they found something intriguing: ongoing chats with several men, many from outside the province and even across the country. The conversations weren't explicit, but hinted Lisa might have been forging new connections, possibly even planning to leave Calgary altogether. Investigators reached out to each of the men, but every single one told them the same thing. They hadn't seen Lisa and had no idea where she had gone. None of them had hosted her or heard from her around the time of her disappearance. The detective team also looked into the strange email address that had been contacting Lisa's mother. It had sent multiple reassurances over the weeks following Lisa's disappearance, always insisting that Lisa was safe, just taking time for herself. The phone number that had placed the late-night voicemail was next on the list. Investigators tried tracing both, but neither led to any useful information. The email account had been set up through a free provider using a fake name. The number was registered to a prepaid cell phone with no contract or owner information. It was a dead end. In the months that followed, the case remained open but grew colder with each passing week. Flyers were posted, articles written, and Lisa's story was shared on local news stations. Yet, not a single credible tip surfaced. Slowly, the stream of emails to Lisa's mom stopped. The inbox that had once offered hope now became a haunting reminder of everything she didn't know. As the months slipped into a full year, Lisa's mother found herself returning to a painful suspicion. One that had taken root early on, but which she had tried hard to push away. What if Alan knew more than he was letting on? She mentioned it to the police more than once, but every time, they gave her the same answer. They had no solid evidence that pointed to Alan being involved. Without concrete proof, they couldn't move forward with any charges or deeper investigation against him. Meanwhile, Alan's life took a different turn. With Lisa gone, he became a full-time single parent. He eventually found stable work at a new car dealership opening on the edge of the city. The owner was looking for motivated staff, and Alan, needing to provide for his children, stepped into the opportunity. Over time, his routine normalized. The dealership owner's girlfriend began helping occasionally with childcare, watching the kids when Alan worked late. It gave him a bit of breathing room, and slowly, things began to look up. Nearly 2 years passed. Alan seemed to be adjusting, even moving on. He had stopped talking about Lisa altogether. Then, something unexpected happened. On a snowy evening in early winter, while pulling out of a parking lot after work, Alan's car was rear-ended. The other driver, a woman, had lost control due to the icy conditions. No one was hurt, and the damage was minimal. She apologized repeatedly and assured Alan that her employer's insurance would cover the cost of repairs. As a peace offering, she handed him a pair of tickets to a local hockey game. They exchanged numbers and stayed in touch. Eventually, the two began to see each other casually. For the first time in a long while, Alan considered the idea of building a future with someone new. Then, in December 2014, just over 2 years after Lisa was last seen, Alan went on a short work trip with 2 co-workers. They had traveled to a nearby city for a dealership conference. While relaxing in the hotel lobby, Alan's phone rang. The call came from a number he didn't recognize. On the other end of the line was a man who introduced himself as a detective. He explained that he had recently been assigned to Lisa's case and was now the lead investigator. There was a pause, and then the detective spoke carefully. "We have reason to believe Lisa is no longer alive," he said, "and we've obtained a warrant to search your home again. In fact, our team is already en route. Alan's co-workers, who were sitting with him at the time, later recalled the change in his expression. In an instant, his face went pale, his hands trembling slightly as he set the phone down. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, he quietly asked for a cigarette, despite having quit months before, and told his colleagues, "I think I need to talk to you." Alan sat quietly for a long moment, his hands clenched together, his mind racing. Then, in a flat, almost mechanical tone, he began to talk. He told his co-workers that 2 years earlier, on a seemingly ordinary day, he and Lisa had gotten into yet another argument. He couldn't even recall what had started it. Maybe it was something trivial, something small. But as was often the case with them, small disagreements could spiral out of control quickly. Emotions ran high, words were exchanged. And then, according to Alan, everything became a blur. He described the moment as if it had happened outside of time. The next, Lisa was lying motionless, and the reality of what had happened began to set in. Alan claimed that what followed was not premeditated. It was panic, pure and simple. He said he felt overwhelmed and frozen with fear. The weight of what had just occurred crashed down on him, and instead of calling for help, instead of explaining or seeking support, he made a decision, one he now believed he couldn't take back. He decided to make it look like Lisa had simply walked away. After telling the story, Alan turned to one of his co-workers, a man he had come to trust over time. Alan remembered that this colleague had once shared a deeply personal experience from his past, something tragic. Years ago, the co-worker had been involved in a drunk driving accident. He crashed his car, and tragically, his friend, who had been riding with him, didn't survive. The memory haunted him, but it also gave him a unique perspective on panic, consequence, and regret. Alan, now consumed by his own crisis, looked to him for guidance. With trembling fingers, Alan started laying out possible options. His thoughts were disorganized, bouncing from one idea to the next. He considered disappearing entirely, leaving his old life behind and running somewhere far away. He thought maybe, just maybe, if he could get ahead of the situation, he could escape the consequences. At one point, he floated the idea of hiring a lawyer to block the warrant, though he admitted he didn't think there was enough time. Then, almost in passing, he mentioned something darker, wondering aloud whether burning down the house would destroy any remaining evidence. But almost immediately, he dismissed the thought, acknowledging that a fire likely wouldn't cover everything, and would only draw more suspicion. In the end, Alan seemed to settle on one thing. Fleeing might be his only chance. His co-workers, caught between disbelief and loyalty, didn't try to stop him. Some even agreed that disappearing could be his best bet. Alan began mapping out where he might go, how quickly he could leave, and whether anyone would help him. He had no idea, however, that time had already run out. What he believed to be a private conversation, shared among friends, was already too late to matter. Because that phone call he'd received from the detective? It hadn't just been a routine notification about a warrant. It was the final act in a year-long, tightly orchestrated police operation. Every word Alan spoke afterward would ultimately work against him. Behind the scenes, law enforcement had been working on Lisa's case with renewed intensity. In 2013, the province of Alberta implemented a new set of legal tools under its revised missing persons legislation. These updates gave investigators greater authority to gather evidence in prolonged disappearance cases, especially those with suspicious circumstances. Lisa's case was among the first to benefit from the new approach. When her file was reassigned to a newly assembled task force, they began building the case from scratch, methodically re-examining everything that had once seemed like a dead end. Their first breakthrough came from examining Lisa's final known phone activity. That strange voicemail Lisa's mother had received late one night. Investigators were finally able to access the phone data. They discovered that it had originated from a disposable prepaid cell phone, a device that had only been active for a short window after Lisa went missing. In fact, the phone had only ever placed 5 calls in total, 1 to Lisa's mom, and 4 others to Alan. This detail raised immediate red flags. Alan had never once mentioned receiving calls from the mystery number. Not only was that omission suspicious, it strongly suggested he had information he hadn't shared. But even more damning was the location of the calls. All 5 originated from the same cell tower, one that served the area near the house Lisa and Alan had shared. If Lisa had really left town, there would be no reason for her phone activity to remain rooted in her old neighborhood. Now on high alert, investigators decided to dig deeper into Alan's financial history. What they found next pushed the case into new territory. On the exact day Lisa was last seen, Alan had made a series of purchases at various local stores. They weren't the kind of items most people would buy on the same day. A large plastic storage bin, bleach, rubber gloves, wooden boards, cement mix, a heavy-duty bucket, and perhaps most oddly, several bags of cat litter. The last item seemed especially strange. According to everyone who knew Alan well, he was severely allergic to cats. He didn't own one, and he couldn't even be around them without experiencing strong allergic reactions. So why the cat litter? The list of purchases, taken together, suggested a troubling possibility. But troubling as it was, it still wasn't enough to bring charges. They needed something more. Something undeniable. Then came the next big discovery. Investigators were able to match the prepaid phone's model to one sold at a local Walmart. Records showed that a phone matching that exact model had been purchased with Alan's debit card just weeks after Lisa vanished. The trail was tightening. Still, detectives knew circumstantial evidence wouldn't hold up in court. To make their case truly solid, they needed either a confession or a body. And so, a bold and elaborate plan was put into motion. A covert operation that would insert undercover officers directly into Alan's life. The mission was given a codename, Operation Aurora, and it would become one of the most carefully orchestrated sting operations in the province's recent history. The first move came quietly. A female undercover officer was tasked with creating a natural, believable encounter with Alan. After carefully observing his routines, she found an opportunity. One day, while Alan was backing out of a parking space, she lightly bumped his car. It was minor, no damage, but it created a reason to talk. She apologized, they exchanged a few friendly words, and she offered to cover any minor repair cost. Over time, the conversation evolved into a casual friendship. A few weeks later, she introduced Alan to a friend, another undercover officer. This man was posing as an entrepreneur opening a new car dealership, and he offered Alan a position on the sales team. Alan, eager to stabilize his life, accepted quickly. What he didn't realize was that this new job and this new friendship had been designed from the very beginning to win his trust. To maintain the illusion and keep Alan fully convinced that everything around him was real, investigators went to extraordinary lengths. The fake car dealership where Alan had been hired wasn't just a backdrop, it was fully operational. From signage to inventory, customer walk-ins to staged paperwork, everything was put in place to give the appearance of a legitimate business. Nothing was left to chance. Law enforcement spared no detail, knowing that Alan was the type to notice if something didn't feel right. In fact, the undercover operation had become so embedded in Alan's world that it mirrored his actual daily routine. Multiple officers were brought in to play roles as fellow employees, customers, mechanics, and even managers. Each one was carefully selected and trained to maintain the story. They were given backstories, schedules, and personalities that made their presence convincing. Day by day, trust was built. Alan began to develop real relationships with these people. People he believed were co-workers, mentors, and friends. They shared casual conversations during breaks, swapped stories after shifts, and even celebrated small victories at work. These weren't just acquaintances. In Alan's mind, they were a community. One officer, posing as a friendly and down-to-earth employee, even introduced his girlfriend to Alan. She quickly became involved with his children, offering to babysit from time to time when Alan had to work late or attend events. Unbeknownst to him, she too was a highly trained undercover officer, one more piece in the elaborate web being spun around him. As weeks turned into months, Alan lowered his guard. He began to speak more freely, sharing personal details and vulnerabilities with the very people who were documenting everything. Detectives watching from behind the scenes agreed that the operation had reached a critical point. Alan had grown comfortable. He trusted his new circle completely. And that's when authorities knew it was time to move to the final stage of their long-term strategy. The next phase would be a carefully orchestrated scenario designed to push Alan emotionally, to create just enough pressure to cause him to slip. a mock work trip was arranged. Alan and two of the undercover officers, whom he now considered close colleagues, were sent to a different city under the pretense of scouting for a new dealership location. The setting was controlled, and the environment carefully selected to minimize risk. While Alan was out of town and in a relaxed state of mind, the lead detective placed a well-timed call. The voice on the line introduced himself calmly and professionally, saying he had just been reassigned to Lisa's case. Then came the carefully delivered message. Police had secured a new warrant to search Alan's home, and the search would begin shortly. That was all the detective said before ending the call. The plan worked exactly as intended. What Alan didn't know was that both undercover officers with him on the trip were wearing hidden recording equipment. The moment the call ended, they subtly shifted the conversation. Alan, visibly rattled, leaned forward and asked them what they thought he should do. Within minutes, he began to unravel. The sense of control he had maintained for 2 years began to fall apart in real time. His words came in fragments at first, just enough to suggest that he had something to hide. But the officers kept the dialogue going, supporting him emotionally, encouraging him to come clean and be honest. Alan took the bait. Eventually, his confession came in full. He admitted that Lisa hadn't simply disappeared. He spoke about the argument, the panic, and his decision to stage her departure. It was all captured on tape, every word recorded by the very people he believed he could trust. What he didn't realize was that the net had been closing in around him for over a year. Shortly after the confession, Alan was arrested without incident and transported back to Calgary. Meanwhile, a team of investigators was already en route to his home. This would be the second official search of the property. The first had occurred 2 years prior, shortly after Lisa was reported missing. At that time, police had combed through the residence and even the basement, but found nothing that raised alarms. This time was different. Investigators now had detailed information, specific clues pieced together from Alan's recorded admissions and past purchase records. In the basement, they focused their attention on a section of the floor that looked newly sealed. In one dimly lit corner, a raised cement platform stood out. It didn't match the layout of the rest of the room, and the material used in its construction seemed odd. The size, shape, and dimensions aligned exactly with the wooden board Alan had purchased 2 years earlier. There was no question. This spot needed to be examined further. While carefully searching the area, police located Lisa Mitchell. It was the confirmation that investigators had quietly anticipated, and with it, the case shifted from circumstantial suspicion to irrefutable fact. But what police found next complicated the narrative even more. As they continued searching through Alan's belongings, detectives examined his personal computer. Among files and emails, they found a pattern of search history that raised additional concerns. These weren't idle curiosities. They suggested a calculated effort to cover tracks. Even more telling was the revelation about the emails sent to Lisa's mother. Although they had seemed convincing at the time, assuring her that Lisa was safe, they were later traced directly back to Alan's computer. Forensic analysis confirmed that he had composed and sent the messages himself, carefully phrasing them to resemble Lisa's tone. But the most chilling discovery of all involved Lisa's cell phone. Hidden software had been installed without her knowledge. Spyware that allowed Alan to monitor her conversations and record her audio in real time. Investigators found evidence that he had intercepted and edited one of her recorded calls to create the voicemail that had misled Lisa's mother. That message, the one that had caused so much confusion, had been manipulated from the start. The audio hadn't been a real-time cry for help. It had been carefully staged. This revelation directly challenged Alan's earlier claims that the incident was spontaneous. Despite the mounting evidence, securing a conviction for premeditated murder proved difficult. The timeline, though suspicious, lacked a single definitive act that clearly established planning beyond all reasonable doubt. In the end, prosecutors agreed to a plea deal. Alan was charged with second-degree murder, a decision that allowed for a lesser sentence but ensured a conviction. Alan's legal team advised him to accept the plea. By pleading guilty, he could avoid the risk of life imprisonment for first-degree murder. He agreed, but even then, he claimed the entire situation had been an act of self-defense. He alleged he acted out of fear. Prosecutors argued the opposite, that Alan had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up, and carefully controlled the narrative for years. The judge ultimately ruled that the available evidence did not meet the threshold for second-degree murder. Alan Shyback was found guilty of manslaughter instead, a verdict that carried a sentence of just 7 years in prison. The response was swift. Prosecutors filed an appeal, arguing that the sentence was too lenient given the scope of the deception, the efforts to mislead Lisa's family, and the emotional toll. The court reviewed the case and agreed to increase the sentence, but only by 3 years. Alan would now serve a total of 10 years. In the end, however, Alan Shyback served just 5 years before being granted early release on parole. But his freedom didn't last long. Shortly after his release, Alan violated the terms of his parole and was sent back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. He remained incarcerated until 2022, when he was formally released from custody. For many, the punishment felt far too light for the scale of what had happened. And yet, from a law enforcement perspective, the case was seen as a major success. A long-term undercover operation had achieved what traditional investigative methods could not. For over a year, a dedicated team of officers had embedded themselves into Alan's life, earned his trust, and quietly built a path to the truth.